Hello and welcome to our weekly look at events inside Syria. I'm Stephen Cole. Just a few days after a bomb went off at the very heart of Syrian power, the UN voted to extend its observer mission in Syria for what it calls a final 30 days. Russia too called for an extension, but also vetoed a resolution calling for sanctions. The United Nations had suspended its work as violence escalated in an uprising which has been raging now for 16 months. On Friday, fierce fighting broke out in Aleppo, 2 days after an attack that killed 4 senior members of Assad's government. Jane Ferguson reports.
Bodies on the streets of Damascus. According to activists, this was the scene shortly before, a defiant Friday protest in the central area of Medan.
Today there was a protest in Khalid bin Walid Street, which is one of the most important streets in central Damascus, and we were told that members of the police department shot protesters and left 5 people dead and so many people injured.
Security forces are reported to have launched a campaign to retake the neighbourhoods held by rebel forces, including Medan. State TV showing rebels and weapons it says were captured while clearing out the area. But opposition fighters say they left of their own accord.
What we know for sure as well is that the Free Syrian Army has decided to kind of retreat a bit out of Medan to protect civilian life.
Beyond the capital, heavy shelling has been reported in several areas of Homs city, as well as in Rastan. In Aleppo province, Free Syrian Army fighters say they have taken control of the villages Azaz and Manbij. This video was filmed in Daraa, near the Jordan border. It appears to show women killed by shelling. A major intelligence figure, Hisham Ikhtiyar, died on Friday from wounds received in Wednesday's bombing, which also killed 3 other members of Assad's inner circle. Ikhtiyar was national security chief, and before that, head of Syria's intelligence agency between 2001 and 2005. Also on Friday, the funeral was held for another key government figure killed in that attack, Defence Minister Daoud Rajha. The killing of Assad's crucial aides is what spurred the Free Syrian Army's current wave of momentum across the country. Those deaths were a blow to the government, but now they are striking back. Jane Ferguson, Al Jazeera.
Well, after many objections and vetoes, the UN Security Council has finally extended the observer mission in Syria. 300 monitors are in the country, but they've suspended their duties because of the escalation in fighting. The extension will be the last, unless there is a marked decrease in the level of violence.
Upon arriving to Syria, first of all, I will ensure that the mission is in a position to use in the best way these 30 days that I consider not as the days of the last chance, but as a demonstration of the concern of international community. Even though the way these concerns are different from one member state to another, indeed, there is a concern because people are suffering in Syria. So this will be my orientation to try to use in the best way this very short period of time.
Well, for more on all of this, I'm joined by our 3 guests in Beirut. Elias Hanna, retired Lebanese general. In Barcelona, we have Alan George, and Alan's a senior associate member of St Anthony College at Oxford University and author on Syria. Here in Doha, Salman Sheikh, director of the Brookings Doha Centre. Thanks to all of you, gentlemen, for coming into Inside Syria. Starting with you, Salman, the battle for Damascus is in its early stages. Is the fact the battle has arrived in the capital a sign the war is moving towards resolution?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, for some time now, the rebels have been taking over areas but not being able to hold them in the north, in the east, in the west and in the south. But the battle that came to Damascus about a week ago, some would say was a testing phase. I think the rebels decided that they would start to test the mettle of this regime, and the regime has now reacted ferociously. There is coherence in this regime, and I think we're likely to see a very long battle ahead.
Alan George, is it clear that if the capital falls to the opposition, then so does the president and the regime. The two are linked.
Well, it would be clear if it happened, but I agree very much with what Salman just said, that there's, I fear, a very long and bloody road ahead. The events of the last week were very dramatic. Certainly the regime was struck a grievous blow, the bombing and the arrival of the armed struggle in Damascus and indeed now Aleppo are setbacks, but by no means the end of the regime.
And General Hanna, do you see, as most analysts saw, that the bomb at the heart of President Assad's power was a pivotal moment in all of this?
Yes, I think it's a turning point for the regime. It's like the momentum, the Free Syrian Army or the resistance are gaining momentum. It's psychological. It's a major breach in the security system of the regime. It tells the regime that if we can reach that high level, high value targets, we can reach you as well. But we have to wait and see how this will affect the military issues on the ground, at the tactical as well as the operational level. And I think that what happened as explosion and killing, high-value targets, the inner circle of President Assad, I think that this highly complicated operation is made not by the Free Syrian Army, because the Free Syrian Army yet is not really able to coalesce and make command and control, fight, hitting also high-value assets for the regime. I think that it's a highly complicated operation made by maybe more than small organization and maybe countries, regional or international.
Back at you, General, because a few people have suggested that the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, isn't coalescing. What would force them to coalesce?
I think when you build a certain success and spread over and momentum, now the regime is losing the periphery. So as much as this regime, the control of this regime crumbles all over, starting from Aleppo into Damascus, this will, create some cement for the Free Syrian Army. However, not all the defectors are joining the Free Syrian Army. Moreover, there is not, so far, a political umbrella for the Syrian Army. You know what I mean? So the political level, the opposition outside, and then you have internally, they are not really in sync together. We have to wait and see. Moreover, this battle inside Syria, I think will create new kind of elites, new kind of personalities that will maybe lead Syria post-Assad. It's not only the political level that is outside, I mean the opposition.
Okay, back in Doha, Salman Sheikh, does the battle for Damascus, do you think, increase the risk of what a lot of people fear, full-scale sectarian war, and therefore increase the risk of that sectarian war spilling over the borders?
Well, yes, there is that danger. Let's understand clearly, the supreme sectarian actor throughout all of this has been the regime. The regime has been trying to incite sectarian civil war since pretty much the start. And certainly in Damascus, we hear reports where certain Alawi, Shabiha gangs have been raiding into areas such as Medan and others and killing people. Now, there will be retribution because we're not just talking about villages and smaller towns, we're talking about Damascus. Nevertheless, we'll have to see how this actually plays out. But my concern is absolutely, and yes, with regards to across the borders, well, I see
and there
that
are quite a few borders to cross.
Well, that's right. Let's start with the Lebanese border. If Damascus really gets hot like it has been over the last week or so, we'll see Damascus in many ways emptying out. And of course, most of those refugees will go to Lebanon. And that, I think, we'd have to ask ourselves, how much strain can Lebanon take on top of what it already is?
Let's go. Alan George, large-scale exodus from Damascus to Lebanon. What would the impact be there, politically and, of course, on the sectarian divides?
Well, enormous. The sectarian balance within Lebanon is very, very delicate. Of course, there's already been street fighting, particularly in the northern port of Tripoli, between Sunni and Alawi groups as a direct reflection of the conflict within Syria. And the Lebanese civil war, 1975 to 90, was never really resolved in a profound way, in the sense that the sectarian divisions within Lebanon persist. And those sectarian divisions in the past have been exacerbated by the arrival of large numbers of outsiders. I'm thinking particularly of the arrival of Palestinian refugees. So it doesn't take a genius to predict that the Lebanese balance could be upset by the refugee flows from Syria, which are now very substantial.
And General Hanna, there is a very substantial military force still under the control of President Assad. How would you estimate the strength of the opposition, the military opposition to him?
I think the military opposition for him against the President Assad is not really now functioning as, like conventional army. Now they are using the hit and run, trying to, harass the regime and pulling him into, reaction, which, make the people against the regime. I think that what makes the forces of the regime coalescing, maybe because the Alawi today are in a situation of lose-lose situation. If they fight, they will lose, and if they give up, they will lose. And if you want to relate what's happening in Damascus into Lebanon, I think that geographically speaking, Damascus is very close to Lebanon. Moreover, the border between Lebanon and Syria most of it is Shia, and they are pro-Assad, and they are allied to Assad. I think that the plan B for the regime, if Damascus falls in the near coming weeks or months, we will see like exodus, as you have said, in two possible ways. Damascus, Homs, and the coastal region of Syria, where you have a lot of Alawis, or Damascus, Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, and then northern Lebanon, and cross into the coastal area. From this perspective, we can see like what we call sectarian war. I mean, in Lebanon, the sectarian war, Lebanon is divided, and the sects are also divided, and we have internal borders within Lebanon. Maybe where you have mixed people between Sunni and Shia, you will have like sectarian one, and maybe probably in Beirut the most.
As well as an exodus, Salman Sheikh, there are also suggestions and parallels being made with the Balkans. Could we see a sort of Balkan solution here for Syria? Is that a possibility, or is that pure speculation about President Assad basically forming a separate state?
No, I don't think that's viable.
Around Latakia?
Yes, no. There was an Alawi state in the 1920s which the French helped establish, but it didn't last more than 17 years or so, and it wasn't.
So that's
it wasn't very viable. There may be an attempt at that. Certainly, there may be an attempt for the regime to go and hunker down, beyond the Alawi mountains in Latakia, but I really don't think that's viable. I think the regime will stand up and fight in Damascus. And if it loses Damascus, then it'll have some very hard choices to face. Either give up or be killed.
All right. Alan George, most in the West, as you know, worry about Iran's military position regarding Syria. Well, not just Syria, but the region as a whole. Is there a diplomatic role for Tehran to be played? The Americans wouldn't like it, but is there one?
Well, potentially there is, but I'm afraid, to me, the notion of a diplomatic or a political solution to the conflict in Syria is unthinkable, for the simple reason that this is not a regime that's in the business of negotiating itself out of power. The political culture of this regime is not to give an inch, is to fight back with maximum force. It stayed in power basically by terrorizing the Syrian population for decades. It knows no other way. So the talk of some sort of negotiations, perhaps involving Iran, to me,
it's a non-starter.
Means very little at all. It's a non-starter. Let's face it, even if Russia actually brought serious pressure to bear on the Assad regime, the regime would not crumble in the face of that pressure. This is not a regime that is susceptible to pressure, whether from the West, Russia, the region, Iran, anywhere else. It's going to fight to the bitter end. As the other guest just said, basically this regime, it's lose-lose. It's death or prison for the senior members of this regime. There's little other possible choice, I fear.
General Hanna, Alan George introduced Russia into the dialogue. Russia said in the last few days that a decisive battle for Damascus had begun. How do you see Russia's role now? Politically, militarily, diplomatically?
I mean, as far as the Russians are involved in Russia and Syria, and as far as the worst case scenario is approaching for the regime, I think that Russia is losing at the international level as well as at the Arab level, because maybe Russia is protecting this regime and trying really to hold this regime as it is, because maybe within the regional issues, I think that Russia is trying to play this axis from, you know, Russia, Azerbaijan, Iran, Iraq, as well as Syria and Lebanon, is trying to have a foothold in this region. I think they are in a losing situation today, the Russian. But I would like to comment on the question that you have asked about the Balkan solution.
Yeah.
I think that in the Arab world, if you have like a panorama look about the Arab world, we are starting to see a shape of a new model for the Arab state that is, you know, shaping. I think that there is no major changes in the international borders, but the major fault lines and the major borders will be internal, whether it is sectarian or tribal or religious.
Do you mean separate states?
No, not separate states. I mean that you have the same state, the international recognized border, no changes. The fault lines are internally. It's like in Lebanon. You have Shia, Sunni, and Christian. Like in Yemen, you have northern Yemen, southern Yemen, you have Zaidi, and you have tribal issues or Houthi. If you go to Libya, you have west and east, you have the question of tribes. It is the same is going to happen in Syria. Syria will never follow the Balkan solution as new states recognized by the international community.
All right.
This is like the situation that we are going to see in the region for the coming decades.
Do you recognize that as a possibility?
Well, yes. I mean, what he's saying, the general is saying with regards to the ethnic and sectarian differences, absolutely right. And there needs to be a grand bargain now in amongst these states. And with regards to Syria...
Would that include friends and sects allied to President Assad?
Well, it would have to
Unlikely, isn't it?
It would have to include the Alawites. It would have to include, of course, the Christians. It would have to, more importantly...
Maybe the Christians, yes.
Yes,
maybe the Christians also.
Absolutely. But fundamentally, there needs to be an agreement, too, between the Kurds and the Arabs inside Syria. And there, the tribes and others also come into play. So there is a need here for a grand bargain, and amongst all of them are Syrians.
Well, that would be a diplomatic solution, which the world would welcome, I'm sure.
Well, it would need to be a political solution amongst the ethnic and sectarian groups inside Syria.
I want to just come back.
Lebanese Taif. Lebanese Taif, I guess.
Say again, General.
It's like happened in Lebanon, Taif, you know, the agreement. It was imposed on the Lebanese in 1990. The last one, Doha agreement, was imposed in Lebanon at the sectarian basis and, you know, religious basis.
Okay, well, Alan George, I just want your take on this, very briefly, if you will.
Well, I think the discussion in the last minutes has raised profound points. I'm broadly in agreement. You can look at Iraq with Kurdish autonomy in the north. It's possible to imagine a Syria with a Kurdish northeast in a state of autonomy and an Alawi autonomous region in the northwest, while the Syrian state persists. I mean, I'm sitting in Barcelona, and you can think of the Spanish model with the Basque autonomy, the Catalan autonomy. It's a collection of ethnic groups, if you like, each with their own languages, even in Spain, and it works.
Salman Sheikh?
I think it would be a mistake, though, if Syria was to adopt the Iraq or the Lebanese model. They need to go deeper than that. And Syria has a tradition of being a unified country where the people have learned to live together with each other for decades, in fact for centuries. And I think Syria can actually present a deeper model of coexistence, but based on a political agreement, which may well be levels of federal or autonomy or things like that.
Who would broker this then? The Russians? The Americans?
Well,
the UN?
Well, there needs to be a grand bargain internationally and in the region.
Yeah, but who
first
would
and
broker
foremost,
it? Who would broker it?
First and foremost, it has to be Syrians themselves. And that's why...
So you're talking post-resolutions?
Well, that's why in terms of any transition, there needs to be already efforts within the various disparate groups inside Syria and the opposition outside to try and come to that kind of agreement, or at least to give it a chance, so that we are able to have this kind of move over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, because that's how long it's going to take.
And is there anybody, General, visible to you who could do such a thing?
I think that most probably Syria will follow the Lebanese or the Lebanese example. Why? Because now the solution cannot really be Syrian now. Now the solution is out of the Syrian hands. It's between Russia, between the United States of America, and some of the Arab countries. And all of these countries are following what we call a low-cost strategy. Nobody is interfering in overtly way, and everybody waiting for this regime to crumble. Now when you have like 17 or 15,000 killed at the sectarian lines, and so you cannot really coalesce or make a union of this country again and rebuild it. Why? Because you will go into the chaotic situation, a failed state, and if you want to rebuild the country, you have to go into what we call security sector reform, or DDR, demobilize, disarm, and reintegrate. And this experience, we've seen it in Iraq. You cannot really trust Sunni to go into the Alawi area as well, and the opposite way. I think that maybe the transitional period will be like a la Catalan, a la Basque, a la Iraq, a la, this is the way I see it in the near future.
And Alan George, would this be brokered by somebody in the region, or do you see the UN taking a role here? Because a lot of people have criticised the UN. They say the UN's hiding behind Kofi Annan, his peace plans in tatters, and the UN are effectively neutralised because of China and Russia.
Well, they're neutralised for the moment. The problem with looking ahead is inherent in this sort of crystal gazing is that there are numerous possible scenarios. It seems to me the first step has to be the fall of the regime. What comes next, initially, probably is going to be a matter between Syrians. One can envisage a kind of Libyan situation. In Libya now there's an initial parliament has been elected, and the new Libya, one hopes, will arise from that. There might be a parallel process in Syria. This, of course, doesn't mean that outside players, the UN, the region, the Arab League, Russia, US, Europe, are not going to have any role whatsoever, and their role might be critical. But in the short-term future, the focus is going to be on the downfall of this regime, which I don't think is yet inevitable, although I think it is very likely. And then, following that, there will be a bargaining process of one sort or another involving principally Syrians.
What is clear is that Syria is now very much on the brink. Now, what happens next is unpredictable, but whatever happens is bound to have the most serious consequences for a country that borders Israel, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. Thanks to our guests in Doha, Salman Sheikh, in Beirut, Elias Hanna, and in Barcelona, Alan George. And I also want to thank you for watching. On the hour, round the clock, Al Jazeera's coverage of the situation in Syria goes on. We also have background and analysis on our website at aljazeera.com. And there too, you can watch this programme again. That's all, though, from me, Stephen Cole, and the team. See you next week when we have another look inside Syria. Bye-bye for now.